Was there anything else that I mean, so military obviously had a big
Absolutely.
influence growing up, but was there something else that you aspired to be, thought, ooh, it would be fun to have that job?
You know, I was always enthralled with sports growing up. I think a lot of the things that make me who I am today came from sports, teamwork, the idea of discipline, pushing to get better. You know, my goal as a kid was to play every sport once.
Great.
I wanted to play every single sport once. Got pretty close. And basketball was definitely my favorite sport. Played football as well. Played baseball. And so that was such a huge influence. I mean, I was always watching sports. I was always at camps, you know, away on tournaments, that kind of stuff. And my parents were really good about getting me involved in a lot of different sports. So that was probably I would probably say the biggest influence in my life was sports. And then just growing up in church, you know, my family was we were at church all day on Sunday. We knew what the deal was. Probably going to be there a couple of days throughout the week too. And so faith has definitely been a major part of who I am and growing up and kind of how I see the world and just kind of seeing through that lens, through that filter. So,
I knew who I wanted to be at a very young age. I wanted to be a banker.
Oh, really?
And this shows my age. Yes, I'm not as young as I may look. I'm 52. I Love Lucy show that had Mr. Mooney, the banker. I don't know if you guys ever saw I Love Lucy.
Yes.
But I saw him. I'm like, I want to be a banker.
Oh, okay.
So I ended up finance. I ended up getting a finance degree.
Okay.
But yeah, I wanted to be a banker.
That was at the University of Ohio?
Florida A&M.
Florida
my
A&M.
MBA is in finance.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
FAMU in the house. Rattlers.
You know, a lot of times for the youth, right? We see young kids around, you know, our kids or, you know, nephews or whatever. We ask them what they want to be when they grow up, right? And a lot of us forget that as we move on in life, what we wanted to be do you remember what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Oh man, I'm not going to have a typical story on that.
Even better.
I think my first heroes were musicians. So like my earliest dreams were holding a tennis racket and playing air guitar and pretending and I'm on stage. So, you know, in terms of profession, even growing up, like grade school, I was not clear on that. And that was a great source of concern and confusion for me as a youngster.
Really?
Yeah. I was always I was a student of the movies and the arts. I loved going to the movies. I loved seeing some of the different types of directors and how they were doing, like Martin Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola.
Yeah.
And I can even remember 8th grade going to the career guidance counselor. And they had this funky little primitive computer thing where you would plug in, what do you like and what are you good at? And then it would come through some kind of a algorithm to tell you, okay, here's the things you should think about when it comes to college. And the thing that came up on top for me, incredibly enough, was film editor.
Oh.
And I have always been a geek of film editing. You know, I don't know if you're familiar, like Martin Scorsese, a lot of times in his movies, he'll have a particular sequence that is the Scorsese edit sequence. Sure. Where it's really artistic and there's no dialogue. It's all just, you know, this almost percussive.
It's his signature, his imprint.
Editing. And I loved it. I love that. So anyway, music was really the only thing I cared about when I was a kid growing up.
I'm interested in knowing about your and music. We share this same passion, but what about that confusion and concern? Why such confusion and concern? And how do you feel about the youth now who may still have that as well, not knowing exactly what direction that they want to go? Should they be so concerned, or can they find peace in that?
Well, it's hard to find peace in uncertainty. And when you're a kid, either you don't really care and you're just kind of like entitled and my parents got money and I'm going to be fine.
Just living a life.
I'm just going to, play sports and have fun. And it just always comes to me. It's always easy. For some kids, it's that way. I didn't really have a model growing up with parents who had a lot of business success. My dad moved around a lot, different things. And so we didn't grow up poor, but we didn't grow up secure. We grew up struggling.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I think I was a kid growing up being, I called myself a worrier, which I have now since retrained myself, because that is not a good thing to identify with. But at the time it was kind of like, I don't know how they do it, these grown-ups. I don't know how they pay for the house. I don't understand this whole thing with cars and insurance and paychecks. I mean, this is when I'm junior high school.
Yeah.
And I'm still living at home. And so it isn't until you get out there and you finally like, okay, I'm going to move out of my parents' house and I'm going to pay a little bit of rent and I'm going to figure out how to pay some bills. And eventually you end up getting a credit card. And so you get this thing called credit. And I didn't get any of that. So it was a little overwhelming when I was a kid thinking about it. So I just tried to stop thinking about it so much and just kind of like do the next logical thing, whatever the next thing in front of me was, until I figured it out. And that took me through my entire career.
What were you trying to study or thinking about doing?
Well, when I was a kid growing up, I never really had any aspirations to be anything in particular so much. I followed along the farming route and was, that was what I was exposed to and that's what I knew. So didn't really have a goal as to what I wanted to do when I quote unquote grew up, but my father did promote into all of us that we would all go to college. And so I had planned on going to college and my father says, well, what are you going to major in college? I says, well, I really don't know. He said, well, why don't you become a veterinarian? So I thought, well, that sounds like a good idea. So I just went along that course and wound up as a equine practitioner and eventually in California.
Now, how about we talk about some early jobs, the early work that you were doing as you were figuring out what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Well, if you go back far enough, the dinosaurs were still around and the Earth crust was still cooling when I tried door-to-door sales when I was probably about around 9, 10. From there,
9 and 10 door-to-door sales. I mean, that's a little early, isn't it?
Yeah, you get a briefcase, you put things in it, you go to their door, open it up, and say, "Hey, I'm selling these items." It was for a company that made everything from Christmas cards to specialized scissors to wrapping paper, anything you could think of. So
it's hard to turn away an adorable 10-year-old with a briefcase
of Christmas cards.
Yeah. Whatever sells.
Let's start with Amy. And can you tell us like when you got into education and why?
Pretty much it's the only thing I've ever wanted to do is work with kids. Every job I've ever had from the age of 12 when I started babysitting. Always been interested in working with children, and I gravitated pretty quickly early on in high school to special education and having a real love for helping others that maybe need help advocating for themselves.
A mentor suggested, hey, you're really gifted working with these kids. Why don't you consider teaching? And there's many times I've lamented how that made the fork in the road. And, it's like gone the money route, like we were talking about, right? And been a lawyer and worked 180 hours a week, or I could work 180 hours and be a teacher. And, but I think it's that servant mindset that, we serve the students that we work for. And I think that those, their needs are what is important to us. And so for me, my leadership experiences came out of wanting to make a difference. So that's why I pursued my master's.
You remember having early memories of what you wanted to be when you grew up?
The memories were centered around the fact that I wanted to just grow a business and become economically self-sufficient. At an early age, my family was split apart. My dad went one way, my mom went the other way, and that was fine.
Okay.
Because I wanted them both to be happy.
Sure.
And as I began to grow, I was probably 10, 11 at the time. The man in my life was my grandfather. He was always there. He always had a group of other older men around him, and I was a young kid coming along, and I'd ask for a dime.
Mm-hmm.
And as the years went by, I'm now 13, 14, it grew to a quarter.
Okay. Yeah.
And then one day, one of the gentlemen just said, quit asking your grandfather for money. Go make your own money.
Okay.
That just, that was a shock to my system. I was like, what? He's telling me not to ask my grandfather. He said, yeah, you could go make your money. So I was, well, how can I make money? I'm only 13 or 14 at the time. He said, you can wash windows, you can wash cars, look at the grass, cut the grass. Get creative. It was like a challenge to me.
Now, who was this that was saying this?
This was my grandfather, one of my grandfather's friends.
Okay.
Because I was asking my grandfather for a quarter. He said, be self-sufficient. Go get your own.
Think back to those early days. You remember what you wanted to be when you grew up? You have like some aspirations, some thoughts?
Yeah, I did. As a kid, you always want to follow in your father's footsteps.
Okay.
So I thought I was either going to be a policeman or a customs agent, because that's what my dad was. He was a customs agent.
Let me, explain mine, because for me, like looking back and how I was growing up in Japan, I probably would have never thought that one day in my future, I will be speaking on a thing called a podcast to a global audience. I would have never thought that.